This could be in your family album. 4 people on a porch swing, early 1900s. 2 adults, 2 children. A comfortable home. It looks like a family portrait, the kind you'd find in a shoebox in your grandmother's attic. But here's what makes images like this strange. When you try to match them to official records, census data, marriage certificates, household documentation, the relationships described on paper don't match what you're seeing. The archive labels this photograph vaguely, family group on porch. Sometimes relatives, approximate date 1910. That's it. No names, no explanation of who these people actually were to each other. Because archives in the early 1900s used deliberately ambiguous language when relationships didn't fit acceptable categories. Your family might have photographs exactly like this. People you were told were aunts or cousins whose actual relationship was never quite explained. The photograph exists in your family album, but the real relationship, that was never written down. This is how archives and families sanitized what they couldn't acknowledge.
This pattern appears constantly in archives. Photographs of people clearly living together, photographed together, documented together, but described with language designed to avoid specifics. Let me show you how common this was. Household group circa 1905. Group portrait, unidentified. Relatives on porch, location unknown. All labeled the same way, deliberately vague. Now look at census records from the same era. When census takers encountered households that didn't fit standard structures, they had limited categories: head of household, spouse, child, boarder, servant, or other relative. That last category, other relative, did enormous work. It could mean a cousin, an uncle, a sibling, or it could mean someone with no blood relation at all. The census didn't ask for proof of relationships. It recorded what people claimed, or what the enumerator decided to write down. Here's a real example. One household in 1910 listed John Smith head, Mary Smith wife, Sarah Jones other relative, 2 children relationship to head, child. Simple, filed away. But when you find the photograph of this household, the spacing between people tells a different story. The woman listed as other relative is positioned centrally. The wife stands slightly apart. The children's posture suggests closeness to the other relative, not the wife. The photograph complicates the census narrative. And archives collected thousands of these photographs, filed them as family groups, never asked the uncomfortable questions. Look at how archives organize these images. Generic labels, minimal context, maximum ambiguity. Because if you don't name the specific relationships, you don't have to acknowledge when they don't fit conventional categories. This wasn't just professional archives. Families did this too. Your great-grandparents might have labeled someone Aunt Helen in the family Bible, not because she was actually an aunt, but because that was easier than explaining who she really was. The photograph shows her living in the house, sitting with the family, present for every major event. But the label, Aunt, hides the reality. These images are everywhere, in institutional archives, in county historical societies, in your family's albums, all showing relationships that didn't fit the official story, all labeled vaguely enough to file away without explanation. Let's talk about why this happened. Why archives and families used vague language instead of honest documentation. It comes down to how relationship documentation worked in the early 1900s. Official records operated on very specific assumptions about household structure. A proper household was expected to have a male head of household, father or husband, his wife if married, their biological children, perhaps extended family, elderly parents, unmarried siblings, perhaps hired help, listed separately as servants or laborers. This structure wasn't just descriptive, it was prescriptive. It defined what was socially acceptable. Look at legal documents, marriage certificates, property deeds. Legal documents reinforced the structure. Marriage certificates documented legal unions between one man and one woman. Property deeds listed male heads of household as owners. Birth certificates listed married mothers and fathers. But what happened when reality didn't match? One man, two women living together, not as employer and servants, but as something else. The census taker had to make a choice. List one woman as wife, the other as sister-in-law or boarder, even if that wasn't accurate, because the form had no category for anything more complicated. Many relationships in this era couldn't be legally formalized. Common law marriages in states that didn't recognize them, interracial partnerships in states with anti-miscegenation laws, same-sex partnerships that were criminalized, blended families after death or divorce that weren't legally acknowledged, informal adoptions or foster arrangement without court documentation. These relationships existed. People built entire lives around them. But the documentary system had no way or no willingness to record them honestly. So workarounds developed. Use boarder to someone who's actually a partner. Use other relative to someone who's not related at all. Use adopted for children that were never legally adopted. Use servant for someone who lives as family. Census takers learned to be creative. Families learned to claim relationships strategically. And archives learned to label photographs ambiguously. Some archives explicitly instructed staff, when relationships are unclear, use general terms. Avoid speculation about household composition. Label as family group unless documentation proves otherwise. This created a systematic pattern of erasure, not through destroying records, but by making them deliberately vague. Compare how men's military service photos were labeled. Private John Smith, Company B, 15th Infantry, 1917, son of Robert and Mary Smith of Portland, Maine. Specific, complete, contextual. Now look at this household photograph. Group portrait circa 1910. That's the entire label. The difference isn't accidental. Military service fit acceptable narratives, full documentation. Complicated households didn't, minimal documentation. This was institutional policy in many places. Schools documented students, but not their actual family structures. Churches documented marriages, but not the households that formed around them. Hospitals documented births, but not who actually raised the children. Everyone participated in maintaining the fiction that all households fit the template, and photographs became the evidence of what the records refused to say. But here's what's missing from this specific photograph. 4 people, clear faces, good quality image. The photograph has been preserved, digitized, made accessible. But the metadata? Group on porch, approximate date 1900 to 1920. Sometimes there's a state listed, rarely a town, never names. You can see everything about their appearance, their clothing, middle class, well-maintained, their setting, a comfortable home with a porch, their ages, adults in their 30s or 40s, children around 8 to 12. But you cannot know who they were, how they were related, why they were photographed together, what happened to any of them. Even if you wanted to trace these people, you'd hit walls immediately. No names to search in census records, no location specific enough to narrow down which town's records to check, no date precise enough to know which census year to examine. And even if you had all that information, you'd face another problem. The census might describe their relationships in ways that don't match the photograph. Look at how they're actually positioned. The man and woman aren't sitting as spouses typically did in this era's portraits. There's visible space between them. Their posture is parallel, not intimate. The children aren't arranged the way they would be with 2 parents, typically centered or between the adults. One child sits very close to the woman, the other sits slightly apart from everyone. This could mean blended family, his children from one marriage, her children from another. Extended family, the woman is a sister, the children are nieces and nephews. Non-traditional partnership, they're not married but living together with children from previous relationships. Informal foster arrangement, the children aren't biologically related to either adult but are being raised by them. The photograph doesn't tell you which, and the archive deliberately doesn't ask, because asking would require acknowledging that not all households fit the prescribed structure. This gap isn't unique to this photograph. It's systematic.
Thousands of photographs showing relationships that matter deeply to the people in them, but labeled so vaguely that the actual relationships are lost. Your own family albums might have these gaps. Photographs of people who were clearly important to your ancestors, but whose connection to the family was never explained, because it couldn't be explained within acceptable categories. So they were called aunt or uncle or cousin, and the real relationship, partner, lover, co-parent, chosen family, disappeared. Not because it didn't exist, but because it couldn't be documented honestly. But look at this photograph one more time. 4 people on a porch swing. When you first saw this, it probably looked ordinary. A family. People who lived together, photographed together. Maybe it reminded you of photos in your own family's collection. But now you understand what might be hidden beneath that surface. These people chose to be photographed together. They arranged themselves on this swing. They held still for the camera. They wanted to be documented as a unit, whatever that unit actually was. That choice suggests a relationship mattered deeply to them. People in this era didn't photograph casually. Photography was expensive, deliberate, meaningful. If 4 people sat for a portrait together, it was because their connection to each other was important enough to preserve. But the system that archived this photograph decided that the specific nature of that connection wasn't worth preserving accurately. Easier to write family group. Easier to avoid difficult questions about who these people actually were to each other. Easier to let the photograph exist in relational limbo. Visible but not explained. Documented but not honestly. This has consequences that reach into the present. Families today still find these photographs in attics and estate sales, in digitized archives, and they can't piece together the truth about their own ancestors because the truth was deliberately obscured. Your great-grandmother's companion might have been her life partner. Your grandfather's boarder might have been his common-law spouse. The children listed as wards might have been loved as deeply as biological children, but the records won't say. And the photographs can only show you what was visible at that moment, not what was true beneath the surface. The people in this photograph lived full lives. They had relationships that were real, complex, meaningful. They loved each other, supported each other, built a household together. But because those relationships didn't fit the categories that records were designed to capture, they were filed away under labels that hid more than they revealed. And now, over a century later, we can see their faces clearly, but we cannot know who they really were to each other. The photograph survived, the truth didn't. I can't tell you who these 4 people were. I can't tell you the exact nature of their relationships, whether they were married, partnered informally, related by blood or by choice. I can't tell you whether they chose vague labels themselves for protection, or whether those labels were imposed later by archivists who didn't want to acknowledge complexity. I can't tell you whether their descendants have spent years trying to understand photographs like this, searching for family connections that official records deliberately obscured. What I can tell you is this: the vagueness in how photographs like this are labeled wasn't neutral. It was a choice to preserve the image while hiding what it actually showed. A choice to file relationships under categories that were safe rather than honest. Thousands of photographs like this exist in archives and family albums. People who lived together, built lives together, mattered to each other deeply, but whose relationships were too complicated, too unconventional, or too threatening to document truthfully. So they were filed as relatives, as household members, as companions, words that could mean everything or nothing. This is the 7th photograph in this series examining how documentation systems decided which relationships deserved honest recording and which didn't. If you want to see what other systems sanitized, erased, or deliberately obscured, subscribe. Because the gap between what's photographed and what's recorded isn't just about the past. It's in your family albums right now, waiting to be honestly understood.